My name is Hilary, and in the whole scheme of things, with the destruction of the transmission towers, what part did the steel play in the destruction of the transmission towers? Was it imported Chinese steel? Which was Australian
Who wants to answer?
Well, I'm sure it wasn't Port Kembla steel. It must have been Whyalla steel.
No.
No, I don't think that was at all the issue in terms of any defect in the steel. They had transmission lines that are designed to withstand pretty much anything other than a mini typhoon, and it was conditions like a typhoon, wind gusts of well over 110 kilometres an hour, and they just, they took out the best designed transmission towers that you can't design a tower that's going to withstand a typhoon reliably. You might know more than that one.
No, that's fine. Good answer. Okay, next question, please.
G'day, Brian Concannon. As privatisation has proven, prices go up, services get lost, jobs get lost. It's a disaster. But I was wondering, what effect did privatisation have on the power grid? Would the same thing have happened with privatisation as well? Chernobyl and Fukushima have proven that nuclear power can be very dangerous. I've heard that thorium nuclear power can be safe. Can you tell me anything about this? And one last thing, technology is showing that we're going to have batteries for household storage. But what about for major storage, for renewable on a mass scale? Could batteries be?
Okay, there's a lot of questions there. Okay, the first thing is really that we're really suffering from this belief that neoliberal economics spreads around, that markets can do everything for us, markets can plan and so on. I think the situation in the electricity industry demonstrates that markets can't plan, and in fact you need a strategy. If you have a goal, say for clean, reliable, affordable energy, you need to develop a political strategy, policies for actually getting there. And you can't just rely on the market to do it, especially as the pricing system in the existing market doesn't have a carbon price, so it doesn't include all the environmental and health costs that burning fossil fuels entail in the price of coal-fired electricity or gas-fired electricity. But even if we did incorporate those costs with a carbon price, there's still major limitations in terms of planning how to do it. And the South Australian example is a good one. South Australia's got a lot of wind, so that's where most wind power developers want to build the wind farms. But what they haven't done, because there's been no planning, is to build the balancing technologies, the dispatchable renewable technologies, whether they are biofuel gas turbines or concentrated solar thermal with thermal storage, or seawater pumped hydro, or batteries. So these haven't been built, and now they're realising that there is a gap. So I think it's time we had a much fiercer attack on the neoliberal economics idea that the market can plan everything. Thorium reactors have often been touted as safe nuclear power, and I'm sad to say that some of the popular science magazines like Cosmos have been spreading this nonsense. If you have nuclear elements that can be fissioned, they can be fissioned in a controlled way, or they can be fissioned in a bomb. Now in the case of thorium isn't fissionable itself, so you first have to convert it to a fissionable isotope, which is called uranium-233, which is different from the uranium they use in uranium nuclear power, which is uranium-235. But it's fissionable, and it is potential bomb material, and in fact the US and the former Soviet Union have exploded nuclear bombs as tests using uranium-233 from thorium as the explosive. So that's complete BS, you know, and it's spread around and everyone's told that. Now, what was the third question? Storage. Yes. So the storage, so we're starting to see people with rooftop photovoltaic solar starting to purchase batteries, which is fantastic, but it's still the pioneering days there. And we are starting to see a few electricity distributors purchasing larger batteries so they can control the fluctuations that they suffer in, or they experience in demand and supply. So yes, it's just starting to happen, it's early days. But what we don't have, and we may never have, is batteries that are big enough to store the electricity from a state or a national electricity system. They'd just be too expensive and too difficult to handle. So that's why in the electricity system the challenge is continuously to balance supply and demand all the time. You can't store electricity on a really large scale, so you have to supply. In the past you had to adjust supply so it always followed demand. Now we're starting to be able to manipulate demand with our smart devices, smart meters and so on. So it becomes a much more interesting challenge, but again, this is early days. Next, please.
You didn't mention in the talks the role of the I believe that the Energy Marketing Authority's got the capacity to intervene in emergencies, and so I'm interested in your speculation as to why you think they didn't intervene in the windstorm in South Australia, which was clearly predictable emergency situation, and I understand there were actions they could have taken.
Yes.
And the other question is on a slightly different topic. Is one of the problems with introducing smart meters and differential pricing and other things is the impact on social justice, people's electricity bills and other things if they're forced to buy power at expensive prices. Is there a way to address that in the modelling as well, so that it will work for people who are, you know, of limited social means?
Well, the best way of answering that first question, which is relevant to the most recent sort of failure to turn on Pelican Point, comes from Pelican Point itself. Their media statement that they put out on Thursday was, and I'll just read it, it's in Pelican Point language. The second unit, 240 megawatts at Pelican Point, is not able to provide a market response under the current rules of the national electricity market unless directed by the market operator. They then say there are a number of other market mechanisms available under the existing design of the national electricity market, including direction by the market operator, that would have allowed other jurisdictions the right to dispatch this capacity to support the system. What does that mean when you debunk it? It means they weren't able to provide a market response. Well, that just meant it wasn't in their economic interest to turn it on. And in fact, we had a market that worked very well for the generators. I mean, whenever we see a tragedy, they see a bonanza. And so for the electricity generators, that's how they want the system to work. They want to push it to crisis because that's when they get paid massive returns on the spot power price. So your earlier question was, one of the earlier questions was, would this have happened if we hadn't privatised the system? Well, the short answer to that is, well, it wouldn't have stopped all the wind damage in the storms and the crisis that happened last year. But if we'd had all of the generators owned by the public or in community ownership, well, then they probably would have known what the fail-safes were on the wind generators, and we wouldn't have had that cascading effect even with the storm damage last year. And this year, the most recent turn-off, if they'd all been publicly owned, well then there wouldn't have been a question about trying to squeeze the money at the spot price. The gas-fired generator just would have gone on. There wouldn't have been a question. And it's the failure for Pelican Point to provide a market response rather than a social response or a broader economic response that's to blame.
The authority's supposed to do that, though, right?
Well, the authority can direct it. They just didn't.
They just didn't. Yeah.
Well, Mark might answer that.
Yeah, I'd like to add that in the statewide blackout last September in South Australia, the authority could have directed, taken action if it had classified it as an emergency, as you say. But they underestimated the strength of the windstorm in advance. They went on weather forecasts that they claim did not indicate that there'd be tornadoes. And there were several tornadoes, and that's what knocked over most of the towers. So they're trying to cover themselves. Maybe things might have been different if they had realised that it was going to be a tornado situation. Then they could have arranged for Pelican Point in advance. See, Pelican Point can't just be turned on instantaneously. It needs probably several hours to bring up to full power. So it was a tricky situation. They had the power. Right now we're seeing the South Australian government wanting to take some of that power for its own operations, and that's understandable. And I think there is a case for South Australia to do future planning on the basis that it may from time to time be disconnected from the rest of Australia. It needs to plan to be able to operate without being connected to the rest of Australia. See, it's on the end of the longest, thinnest, skinniest electricity supply system in the world. 5,000 kilometres from far north Queensland down to South Australia with a spur line to Tassie. And those regions at the ends of that line it isn't easy to give them good attention. So it does make sense for South Australia to plan that it might have to go at it alone from time to time. And that's quite feasible. We've done some preliminary computer simulations on South Australia operating alone. It requires concentrated solar thermal power, it requires more storage, but it can be done. Now the other question is a much more difficult one. It's about the social justice aspect of if we have electricity prices going up considerably during the peak period, and the retail prices wouldn't go up anything like the way the wholesale prices have been going up, because for a start a lot of wholesale electricity suppliers do not go by the spot price, but they have contracts. So they have hedging. But nevertheless, it would make sense in terms of dealing with the peaks to have retail prices going up to some degree during the peaks. And one of the ways that social justice situation can be improved is for expanding energy efficiency programs that are already operating. So most of us in Australia use far more electricity than we actually need, and there are now technologies and measures for dramatically cutting our daily demand without suffering. So we can still have a good lifestyle but without wasting so much electricity. So that would certainly help. I don't think it's a complete answer. I'd like to sort of think about the question longer term, because it is a very important question.
Okay. And the next question. Where's Ollie? Oh, sorry. Okay, you go next, Jim.
Yep.
But the next question should be down here at the front.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much, Dave and Mark. My points are related to this question of how we're going to resolve this problem or tackle this problem. And I think there's two issues, but the fundamental question is not a technical one, because I think it is absolutely clear that renewables are the force of the future, and fossil fuel is an old system which is dying. The problem is political, not technical. Leaving aside all the lies that David talked about, the problem is political, and I think it's a question of democracy. Actually, is really what we've got to tackle. My two aspects are this: there's the decentralised question, and then there's the centralised question. I'd like to ask Mark what he thinks about the status of solar power in Australia. My understanding is that solar power, rooftop solar power, is one of the most advanced in the world. Is that correct? And I just want to speak from my own point of view. We have solar powered hot water system, and we haven't paid any money. We turn off our switch for the whole of summer. And if we could get most of Australia to have rooftop solar hot water, we could massively cut, I don't know, from my own experience, we've massively cut our bill by turning off the switch to the outside power for about 4 months. And, you know, so this to me must go on a massive scale. Can we subsidise even more than has been done a system like that? And secondly, is it possible for cooperatives to develop? I think in the question of democracy, I've heard that in rural areas people are getting together and sharing solar power, and I think all these are going to cut back. Also in flats and apartments, they're sharing solar power and trying to do that. The second point is we've got.
Well, that's
enough, I think.
I'll just quickly go on to the second point, which is even more important. We have got to re-nationalise the power industry. And in fact, Weatherall, Premier Weatherall has actually floated that idea of re-nationalising the power industry in South Australia. I think that's a fundamental point. And secondly, we've got to take back Ausgrid and the power industry in New South Wales. Unless we do that, we have no chance of solving our power problems. We've got to take it back and put it in public hands and put it under democratic control. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I've got about 6 points from you, but I'll have a go at some of the technical ones, and I'm sure David will want to comment on your on the political side, which is really important. So the first thing I'd like to say is that for people who use electricity during the daytime, whether it's a home or a shopping mall or a business, rooftop solar is highly cost effective now. Highly cost effective in terms of avoiding buying electricity from the grid. So you might end up paying 15 cents a kilowatt hour for your solar electricity if you add it all up, but you're avoiding paying 25 to 35 cents a kilowatt hour buying from the grid. So if you're using power during the daytime, avoiding using that power with solar is highly economic. However, if you are working during the daytime away from your home and solar shining on your roof and only running the fridge and doing not much else, it's not yet, to be honest, it's not yet economic. So you might have solar because you want to have solar, but it's not economic. It will become economic as batteries become cheaper, so that daytime power that you're not using can be stored and used when you come home in the evening. So that's one of the problems why solar does still need some support, because although avoiding using solar to avoid grid electricity prices during the daytime is highly economic, if you're not using the power during the daytime, it's not yet. So that's the first thing. So the other thing is, you mentioned solar hot water, that's fine, but another way is to have a highly efficient heat pump hot water system which uses very little electricity and run that with solar. And you can run that during the daytime. In fact, you should run it during the daytime, during the hottest part of the day, because that's when your heat pump is most efficient. So heat pump plus solar PV is a very good alternative to a solar hot water system, which is backed up with a resistance heating. You asked about co-ops. The first thing to say is that the whole basis for the renaissance in wind power in Denmark and solar and wind power in Germany has been cooperatives. They have been, until recently, the major driver for the growth of renewable energy in those countries. In Australia, we're just starting to see the beginning of that. We have 2 essentially cooperative wind farms in Australia, although one of them is actually a company rather than a cooperative. The one in Western Australia, in Denmark in Western Australia, and we have about a dozen solar farms, medium-sized solar systems, which are some form of community owned, whether they're cooperatives or have a company model or some other model. The new, here in Sydney, in the new convention centre, is partly a developer's dream, but the solar that's going on the roof is the result of a community initiative working together with the cooperatives. So co-ops are going to be big, and community renewable energy is going to be big, and there is a very big conference taking place in 10 days' time in Melbourne on community renewable energy. I think I better stop there and give David a go.
Yeah, go for it, David.
Well, I think often we're talking about, you put solar panels on your roof, or you invest in this kind of heat pump at home. But I think we need to remember that 30-40% of residents in places like Sydney are renting. And if we play this out, as battery technology gets more attractive, as it becomes more economically feasible for the upper and middle class parts of society, they start investing in batteries and solar power. They start turning off the grid, or using a vastly smaller amount of the grid-based power, and you get an increasing concentration of people who are renting or in lower socioeconomic groupings having to pay not just the higher cost for their electricity because they're not getting the benefit of the batteries and the solar, but also they're then having to, as the wealthier parts of society turn off the grid, they are then responsible for this, very large 20th century distribution system, which they have to pay proportionally more just to keep the power on. So I think we see this, we need to see this as not just an environmental crisis, and it clearly is, but we also need to see it as, if we're not careful, a slow-moving social crisis where we actually price poor people out of power. And that's why I think the idea of community ownership, community co-ops, and active intervention, so that we allow people, we actually have the public paying the capital cost up front. And or you can have publicly owned solar panels on your house. We need to have that combination, because if we're not careful, the technology will run off. Those with the wealth and the capacity to benefit from it will cut themselves out of the system, and and the rest of us will be sort of left as sort of economic orphans holding on to an ageing, decrepit, fossil fuel-based power system, and that's I think quite a disaster.
Could I just add? Just very quickly, I think a little further down the track, we could have regulations, as solar's getting so cheap, that actually require landlords to put solar on the roof, and not just solar, but to make their accommodation energy efficient, so people don't have to use a lot of power.
Okay, who's got the next? Great.
We can't get them to fix the windows.
The situation that happened in South Australia, I feel, has got some similarities with Enron in California and US. I'm just wondering whether you could comment that is a similar sort of situation and how we deal with that. I think that they from what I can remember of movies about that, they manipulated the market and all those sorts of things. And now that we've privatised New South Wales, how are we going to deal with those sorts of issues?
Okay. Yeah, good. Perhaps you could also comment on the South Australian government statement from Koutsantonis, the minister, saying we're going to make an announcement about something, to take back control. Yeah. So there's Enron.
Well, I mean, the Enron example, I mean, we've seen we've got a small Antipodean version of Enron. That's what we had. And that's more than 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
So it is extraordinary that our national regulator doesn't have mechanisms in place to stop us being gouged in the same way. But we don't. Well, they're not willing to use it. And I think if you read through the doublespeak of that NG statement, what they're basically saying is, well, we kind of could have been directed, but we weren't, so no. Is really the statement.
That is it.
And why isn't that happening? Well, I haven't gone through and looked at who the key personnel in the Australian energy regulator are, but I reckon if you did, you'd see a bunch of high priests of neoliberalism there who are so loath to interfere in the market that even when they can see the potential for a disaster, they hold back on using any interventionist powers. So, and that's part of the problem. Even if they have the kind of reserve powers there, if you've got it full of a bunch of personnel who take their social equity advice from Deutsche Bank, well, they're not even going to use the powers when they've got them, and that's what we had.
Okay, here we go, Mark.
AUMO has just appointed as the new CEO the woman from New York State who's one of the leading promoters of renewable energy there. I think she's going to have a battle on her hands.
Okay, who's next? When is it?
I'll go next. I want to, is this coming through all right?
Yeah.
I want to ask a question to do with our media, which means our major newspapers, the Herald, the Australian, and will also include the Guardian, but also the national news. Now, I'm well aware that we all are aware probably that the Australian is just running a complete campaign against nuclear. It's like their major campaign against. I'd like your assessment, particularly you, David, but also, of course, you, Mark. What do you think of the quality of the journalism? We take the Sydney Morning Herald, the Guardian, but in particular, is the ABC doing a good job in bringing its various programs on both radio and television, including Q&A, which is watched by so many people? Is the ABC doing a good enough job in bringing the truth? Because really we are dependent on it, and we'll be having a big night on the ABC. So just like your feelings or your thoughts about them, because they're crucial to information transfer.
Okay, first.
Well, for me, one of the if there's one fact to take away from tonight, it's nothing that I said. It's something that Mark said, which I think should resonate with all of us, and I think you should have given it more prominence, actually, Mark. It's the fact that what happened in South Australia and Victoria was there was this massive and quite predictable peak in demand. And it starts kicking in about 2:30 on a really hot summer afternoon, and it sort of starts washing out at about 6:30 and starts properly washing out at about 7 o'clock. It's this big surge that happens like that. And as Mark said, baseload power from either a nuclear reactor or a coal power station cannot and will not respond to that. So when you have the Treasurer going in with a lump of coal and saying a lump of coal is the response to this peak demand, how is it that nobody in the media has really picked up Mark's pretty obvious point that even if we built the coal power stations, that wouldn't have addressed and won't ever address this peak demand problem? So we're not having a sophisticated argument about that. We're having this sort of debunk the lie argument, but we're not able, I think, to put forward those more intelligent, sophisticated arguments that would actually help map the answer. And who's the new national? There's a new supranational editor for the two Fairfax papers, which is The Age and The Herald, that just got announced this week, and it's a former staffer of Joe Hockey. You have a look at what The Australian did, and I had a couple of headlines here from The Australian, one of which was, the government is pursuing a climate change policy which it knows will cause power cuts. That's one. Another one was from The Advertiser, dimwits. And another one from the Weekend Australian, South Australia blackout, renewables don't cope with rapid change report fines. I mean, they are on a core lie campaign. But one of the good things is The Australian has a lower readership nationally than pretty much any other major paper. And in New South Wales, More people read the Manly Daily than the Australian.
Fake news.
You go for the ABC.
For my sins, I used to do a lot of media about renewable energy and energy policy. And a few years ago, it was reasonably easy to get into, even, well, it's been some time since the Murdoch press, but it wasn't that hard. But what's happening now, in my impression, is that it's getting much harder to get the issues out, even in the ABC. When my last book came out 3 years ago, Philip Adams very kindly did an interview with me on LNL. And then I went to the environment reporter on Radio National's breakfast program and said, well, how about it? And he said, no, you were on LNL. We're not going to put you on now. And it's really got much harder to get the message out on the ABC.
Joined the Liberal Party.
The ABC now has people who strongly spout the government line. Chris Ullman is one of them. And if he's around, sorry Chris, but it's quite obvious that it's true. There still are a few good journalists on the ABC. Matt Peacock is a very fair journalist. He's done fantastic reports on asbestos and a whole range of things, and also on the energy situation. But it's struggling to get in. To come back to your point, David, about the peak issue. Another point that we could be making more strongly that the journos haven't been making is that last week, during that really high peak in demand in the heat wave, solar actually shrunk the heat. Solar destroyed the peak until the sunset.
Where would we have been?
Otherwise, it would have been a much worse situation from about midday onwards. But solar came on and reduced that daytime demand dramatically. And it was only about 6 p.m. The heat wave actually that night went well into the evening, 6 till 8 p.m. and solar was off by then, and unfortunately so was wind, and so there was the need for rolling blackout.
Okay, it's already our time, but there's a lot of questions, so is there one more? We'll take one more.
Why don't you take two questions when I say that?
Okay, we'll take two. We'll take your question and then the question down the front, and then we'll answer them together. Okay, so off you go.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas. First question is, could you clarify currently what the electricity production is in Australia? 5 years ago it was 35 gigawatts of electrical power. We had another 15 gigawatts of chemical power in the form of, say, oil and gas. So what's the current status of the electricity generation at the moment and capacity? Secondly, a lot of the power generators are doing maintenance post schools returning back to normal. That's actually viewed within the industry as a form of setting the market to fail or to price gouge. Could you clarify on that? And thirdly, from a Mr. Shoebridge as an ex-lawyer, the concept of chain of command. If our leaders were actually threatened with the possibility of going to prison or some form of ramification for their words and their actions, would that actually have an influence on their ability to let the truth come out? Let lies be tapered or be very carefully scrutinised before they get mentioned. And fourthly, what would make politicians become a little bit more pre-intelligence and pre-truth rather than the world of post-lies? Thank you.
Bring the microphone up the front, please, and then we'll take the second question.
I just want to put just one question. Is there a role for superconductors in long-range transmission and overcoming resistance?
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, who wants to go first?
Okay.
He wanted to go first.
Electricity generation has mostly been declining in Australia. Grid electricity generation, the large-scale stuff on the grid, has mostly been declining in Australia over the past decade. partly as a result of the growth of rooftop solar, partly as a result of the decline in the manufacturing industry, and partly as a result of the modest growth in energy efficiency. The annual energy, I can't give you precise figures, but roughly, it's not measured in gigawatts, that's power. It's about 200 terawatt hours per year is the annual generation on the grid, and you add to that the rooftop generation, which we don't know exactly. The generating capacity, somewhere like 50 gigawatts, I would think, but the capacity's been going up because of the growth of wind farms. Wind farms don't operate at full capacity all the time, of course, so the capacity's going up, but the energy generation hasn't. Coming to superconductors, they are new technology and still very expensive. They would indeed remove resistance in long-distance transmission, but the resistive losses are not very great for high-voltage long-distance transmission. In Australia, there are about 3% of electricity generation gets lost on long-distance transmission, but much more gets lost locally in the local distribution, about 7%. So if you add them together, you get the losses in the wires are about 10%. We don't have recent figures on that, but that's how it used to be. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, David?
Look, I don't know how you stop politicians lying.
Vote them out.
Well, that's the obvious. I mean, the obvious answer is you vote out the ones who lie. Politicians are always very loath to put in place any kind of separate accountability measure apart from the own. I mean, you have the pretend accountability of question time, which I think should be renamed answer time, and would actually greatly improve potentially improve the period. But question time is not accountability anymore. It's more just pointless theatre. So we don't have accountability for lies there. Increasingly, the amount of lies being generated means accountability sort of is always in a lag. And we've seen recent cases of serial liars getting elected despite the lies being exposed. So I actually think it's as I said before, the way that we're going to improve our politics is, of course, we keep the accountability, we keep pointing out the lies, but far more fundamentally, we have to sell our own truths and our own exciting visions, which link into things that people already know and care about. They care about renewables, they actually care about the planet, they worry about the kids. On the weekend, I can tell you now, there would have been thousands, millions of people across this country who were thinking, what the bloody hell is going on? Are we this frog in the saucepan and is it suddenly getting too hot? And we needed to find a way, and I blame myself partly and my party and others, we needed to find a better way to communicate with them and touch those emotions and touch those concerns and turn it into political action. That's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much for both our speakers. I've been circulating a cartoon this week, which some brilliant person did. There's one character says, "Here, have some clean coal." And the person they give it to says, "Here, have a dry water." so you have to fight the lies, really very cleverly, I think. So thank you very, very much to Professor Mark Diesendorf and David Shoebridge for what they've done for us tonight in it's explaining really how we can think through this and give us tools to fight the arguments out in the community that we're going back into. The topic for next Thursday, February 23, is what is left of the social welfare state in Australia, the future of distributive justice and possibilities of a guaranteed minimum income. The speakers would be Dr. Ben Spies-Butcher from Macquarie University and Eva Cox, also an adjunct professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. It's different from the PINK program. There was a problem with the topic next week because of the New South Wales parliamentary sitting time for Jihad Dib. So that topic will be on the following week. So please tell your friends about both those topics. And the audio from our programs is available at our website, Original Sydney Politics in the Pub.org.au. So please give one more round of applause to our... I've got a couple of announcements to make. There's a video, a documentary called Time to Draw the Line, which is about Australia and East Timor and the long-running problem that Australia won't settle a boundary with East Timor. So on Monday, next Monday, this will be screening at 6:30 p.m. at Burwood, Hoyts, Wetherill and Belgrave Cinema, and on the following Monday the 27th at the Dendy Cinemas, Newtown. It may be a bit more convenient for people here, and it's $20 a ticket. There's another movie coming called The Coming War on China, a film by John Pilger, which will start screening next week at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at Dendy, Newtown. So every afternoon. So I'll put that to you. And then one more thing. Next Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock at the Trades Hall Auditorium, there'll be the launch of a program called Let's Make an Economy for Everyone. It chimes in with what David said. It's about doing the positive. Let's start saying what we want rather than just saying, you bastard liars, we don't like what you're doing. So you're welcome to come to the Trades Hall Auditorium, 6 o'clock next Wednesday. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thanks, Peter. Mark, you're a hero. I thought it was a really good Thanks very much.
Got it open.